In a curio shop on Bonavista's Church Street, a shopkeeper thumbs a 50-cent piece stamped with the head of a country that stopped existing in 1949 and sets it back in the tray with the other outdated coins. At 5:14 on a July morning, the first sunlight to reach North America lands on a white lighthouse at Cape Spear. In a kitchen above the wharf, a woman lays strips of salt cod on newspaper and pours tea the color of dark rum. For 400 years, a single fish had built the villages, the wages, the songs, and the reason to cross the ocean. Then, on one summer morning in 1992, that fish was ordered out of the water. What follows crosses the coastline that fish built, the cod calendar that set the tables, the outport dialect that distance preserved, the moratorium that emptied the wharves, and the crab boats, oil flights, and harbor lights that taught the island how to keep living after. The country behind that coin was not given up in a single mood. The Great Depression broke a dominion already living too close to the edge, and in 1934, Newfoundland surrendered self-government to a British-appointed Commission of Government, with no elected legislature and London holding the purse strings. After the war, the question returned, and in 1948, by a margin close to 52 to 48, voters chose Canada over responsible government. On March 31, 1949, a country became a province. The light comes first to the rocks. Before it reaches the fishing ports of Nova Scotia, before it touches the towers of Boston or the wheat of the prairies, the sunrise finds the edge of the continent at Cape Spear, the easternmost tip of North America, where the Atlantic runs black-blue below a white tower and a red roof, and the spray climbs the cliff in the wind. The Cantwell family tended the lamp here for more than 100 years, hauling oil up the path, trimming the wick, keeping the beam turning through fog thick enough to hide a ship at 50 meters. There is a plainness to being first. The land simply ends and the ocean begins, and everything that was ever built on this island was built because of what lived in that water. Follow the light south, and it settles on a working slip. In Petty Harbour, a fishing village barely 20 minutes from the capital of St. John's, the day begins before the day does. A man in oilskins comes down to the stagehouse while the water is still the color of slate. And here, the scale of the whole island narrows to a pair of hands. Hands that screw the cap off a battered thermos, pour tea into it, set it on the gunwale. Hands that bait a trawl hook by feel in the half-dark, the way a father taught a son and a grandfather taught a father. 3 generations working the same grounds. The boat pushes off the slip before the tea has cooled. There is no ceremony to it. There has been a dawn run out of this harbour for longer than anyone can name. And then the harbour mouth opens and the boat is through it, the bow cutting flat grey water, the wake widening behind, the land shrinking to a low green line. This is the oldest movement on the island. A small boat aimed into the unbroken sea, repeated every morning across 400 years and 1,000 coves. The water is vast beyond measure, and the boat is a splinter upon it, and none of that has ever touched the reason the boat goes out. The heading is north, and north is also backward in time, up the coast to the high headland of the Bonavista Peninsula, where the cliffs face the open Atlantic and the sea stacks stand off the shore. Near here, in 1497, the Venetian navigator John Cabot, sailing under an English flag, is said to have made landfall and reported the sea so thick with cod that his crew had only to lower a weighted basket over the side and haul it up full. The story crossed the ocean before the men did. Within a generation, fishing fleets from England, France, Portugal, and Spain were crossing 3,000 kilometers of open water each spring for a fish they could not catch at home. The cod was the reason. There was no other. But a fish pulled from the cold Atlantic in June would rot before it reached a European table, and so the catch had to be turned into something that would keep. Split down the belly, salted, and spread to dry on a flake, the raised wooden rack of poles and boughs that stood behind every house, the cod became saltfish, and saltfish became money. Rows of white split cod lie in the sun and the salt wind, turned by hand, morning after morning. This was the currency of a dominion. The whole country was built on this one dried object, laid out to cure on a rack of sticks above the shore. But the cod never arrived alone. Something colder came with it, drifting down from the north each spring, and on the right morning it can still be heard grinding in the harbour.
They call this stretch of water Iceberg Alley, the corridor of open sea that runs down the northeast coast from the Labrador Sea toward the Grand Banks. Each spring, the Labrador Current draws ice south along it, much of it carved from the glaciers of western Greenland, some of it 10,000 years old, frozen hard before the first fishing fleet ever crossed. The current is the machine beneath everything on this coast. It is cold enough to carry a mountain of ice 1,000 kilometers without melting it away, and cold enough in the same motion to stock the sea it passes through, because the water that floats the bergs also feeds the plankton, and the plankton feeds the small fish, and the small fish
were the reason a country ever grew here at all. Grandeur and groceries arrive on the same current. Follow one of those bergs toward shore, and it comes to rest off Twillingate, a scatter of painted salt box houses ringing a harbour on the island's north coast, a town that calls itself the iceberg capital of the world, and has the traffic to prove it. Here, the ice runs aground in the harbour mouth and stays into July. A wall of white, 200,000 tons heavy, sitting a stone's throw from the fish plant and the general store. For all its scale, it becomes ordinary quickly. A woman hangs washing on a line with a berg framed behind it. A man backs his truck down to the wharf without once looking up. The ice is simply weather that can be seen. A neighbor that came in the night and will leave when it leaves, and the town goes on beneath it. Up close, the berg is not white at all, but blue, where the meltwater runs off its flank, ribbed and pitted, ancient, silent except for the small cracks and drips of its own slow undoing. It rolls once, heavily, and settles, and the water around it goes flat again. 10,000 years of snow, pressed to glass, drifting past a kitchen window. The chill breathing off it is the northern cold that fills the sea below with food. That food arrives at the door in early summer at Middle Cove Beach, a shingle strand a few minutes north of St. John's, where at dusk the shallows begin to turn silver. The capelin are rolling, the small spawning fish flinging themselves onto the wet stone by the million, receding with the wave, surging back again, until the whole tide line glitters and thrashes. Families come down with buckets and dip nets and 5-gallon pails, and the whole ocean comes down to a child crouched at the waterline, scooping fish into a plastic bucket with both hands. That night, up the hill, the same fish sizzle whole in a cast iron pan, heads and all, in a spoon of hot fat on the stove, and the smell of them fills the small kitchen. Offshore, the cod are following the capelin in, fattening on the same run that fills the buckets on the beach. The fish come ashore in a silver seam, thousands at a time. Then the wave pulls back and takes the rest, and the seabirds and the whales work the edge of it just beyond the surf. This is capelin, the small silver fish that pulls everything else in behind it, the base of the whole cold water table. The current that fed the tables also kept the villages apart, each one folded into its own cove, its own weather, its own week. And in that apartness, something older than Canada survived. The question is how.
The answer is in the geography that made the isolation. For 400 years, most of these coves could be reached only by water. Each village folded into its own harbour, cut off from the next by headland and ice and the length of a winter. And the speech that families carried across the ocean settled into the coves and set. On Fogo Island, off the northeast coast, the community of Tilting was settled in the 1750s by Irish families from counties Waterford and Wexford. And more than 250 years later, the lanes still carry their surnames, and the voices still carry their vowels. Linguists who make the ferry crossing find turns of phrase here that faded from Ireland generations ago. A grammar kept whole by distance, the way the cold keeps everything else. "Where are you to?" a man asks across a fence, meaning simply, "Where are you?" Down the coast, the accent shifts. In Trinity, a harbour town of white clapboard churches and painted merchant stores that Europeans have fished out of since the early 1500s, the older voices lean not toward Ireland, but toward the West Country of England, toward Dorset and Devon, and the port of Poole, whose crews came across each spring for 300 years. When the linguist George Story and his colleagues at Memorial University assembled the Dictionary of Newfoundland English, first published in 1982, they gathered thousands of words heard nowhere else on Earth. A good many of them West Country terms that England itself had long since let go. The island became a museum that did not know it was one, holding the 17th century in its everyday mouth. Where the old dialect turns to performance is in the capital. On George Street in St. John's, 2 short blocks said to hold more bars than any street of its length in North America, a newcomer can be made an honorary Newfoundlander in a rite called the Screech-In, a shot of dark rum once traded up from the West Indies, a line of dialect repeated back without stumbling, and a kiss pressed to the cold mouth of a codfish held out across the bar. Half of it is ceremony, and half of it is theatre for the mainland, and everyone in the room knows the difference, and no one seems to mind. Some of the customs need no audience at all. In the dark stretch of December, once the boats are hauled up for the year, comes mummering, the old house visiting game, in which neighbours pull on wrong clothes and pillowcase hoods, stuff cushions under their coats, muffle their voices to a squawk, and rap unannounced at a door. The household must guess who has come in before the visitors will unmask, and once they are named, they are given a drink and a bite, and the whole disguised procession moves on to the next house up the lane, and somewhere an accordion comes out, and a kitchen party runs well past midnight. But the kitchen holds the deepest tradition, and it is a quiet one. On a counter overnight, a slab of hard bread sits soaking in a bowl of water, softening for the morning meal of fish and brewis. By first light, The salt cod has been freshened and flaked and warmed through with the bread, and small cubes of fat salt pork, the scrunchions, sputter in a blackened skillet until they render gold and crisp, and the household spoons them, fat and all, across the plate. The whole house takes on the smell of pork and salt fish and strong tea. This is Sunday in 100 outport houses at once, a meal built entirely from what the flakes and the sea once gave for nothing. The kitchens were full because the wharves were full. Then, on one July morning in 1992, Ottawa emptied both.
On the 2nd of July, 1992, in a hotel ballroom in St. John's, the Federal Fisheries Minister, John Crosbie, a St. John's man who had grown up around the trade, stood in front of a room of angry fishermen and read out the end of the northern cod fishery. The stock had collapsed to something near 1% of what it had been within living memory, scraped off the spawning grounds by decades of factory trawlers that could take in a single hour what an inshore boat took in a season. The closure was announced as a 2-year measure, a pause to let the fish return. More than 30 years later, the northern cod has never fully come back, and the ban has never been fully lifted. The number that morning was 30,000. "30,000 people were put out of work by a single announcement, in a province of barely 500,000, the largest mass layoff in Canadian history. It did not stop at the men on the boats. It reached the women on the plant floor, the truckers who ran the catch, the net menders, the store that sold the oilskins, the whole vertical world that 400 years had stacked on top of one fish, and it went still in a single summer. The scale of what was lost is easiest to read where the fishery once ran largest. Across the strait, on the Labrador coast, Battle Harbour was for 2 centuries called the capital of the Labrador cod fishery, a cluster of stages and salt stores and merchant premises that handled the catch of a whole coast. Today, it is held as a historic site, its buildings restored and empty, the salt cure sheds silent, a place people reach by boat to see how an entire economy once looked while it was still working. The wind moves through it. Nothing is landed there now. The emptying did not always announce itself. Even before the moratorium, under a resettlement program that ran from the 1950s through the 1970s, the government had paid families to abandon the smallest outports and move to larger centres, and whole communities were floated across the water on their own houses or simply left to the grass. The cod closure finished, slowly, what resettlement had begun. On Change Islands, an outport off the northeast coast, the year-round population has fallen below 200, most of them past middle age. The school long shrunk, the young gone to the mainland for work the island could no longer offer. In a kitchen on one of these coasts, a woman keeps a clock that used to be set by the fish plant. For 3 generations, the shift whistle marked the middle of the day. The plant is closed now, the whistle gone, and the quiet at noon has become the loudest thing in the house. The check that replaced the paycheck came in a government envelope, and for a while the envelopes kept coming. And then a program ended, and something in the arrangement that had held families to these coves for 400 years came quietly undone. What a coast does when the single reason for its existence is taken out from under it is not settled in the first winter or the second. It is settled by who stays, and who packs a bag, and where the work is found instead. The morning after a fishery closes, the boats are still there. That is the cruelty of it, and the beginning of the answer, both. In the years after 1992, with the cod gone, and 30,000 jobs gone with it, the men who had always pointed a boat at open water began pointing themselves west instead, toward the oil sands of Fort McMurray, Alberta, 4,000 kilometers inland, as far from salt water as the country goes. A rotation took shape that a whole generation would come to know. 3 weeks in the camps, 1 week home. A work bag packed and unpacked so many times it wore soft at the corners. In a bungalow outside Gander, a man sets his steel-toed boots by the door on a Sunday night, and the taxi to the airport comes before the light does. St. John's International sees them off and takes them back. The red-eye east on a Friday, full of men who fish for oil now, dozing against the windows with their ball caps down, coming home to a rock that could no longer pay them to stay on it. The paycheck is Albertan. The address is still Newfoundland. For 20 years, the island exported its people by the plane load and lived in part on the money they wired back. A country of half-empty houses kept warm by wages earned 2 time zones away. But not all of it left, and not all of it stopped fishing. In Fortune, a ferry town on the Burin Peninsula's southern tip, the boats still go out, only now they come back low in the water with something else. On the plant floor, snow crab moves down the line in steel trays, sorted by hand, weighed and packed for markets in Tokyo and Boston. And the animal that was once bycatch, a nuisance in the cod nets, has quietly become the most valuable catch the province lands. Cold water made the cod, and that northern water grows the crab. And the men who baited trawl hooks by feel now read the sea for a different creature entirely. A pair of hands lifts a crab from the tray, turns it, sets it down. The same motion that once turned a cod, closed now, around the creature the old fishery used to throw back. Above the harbour of St. John's, at the mouth of the Narrows,
where the cliffs pinch the sea into a channel a ship can barely pass, Signal Hill keeps its own record of reinvention. Here, on the 12th of December in 1901, the Italian engineer Guglielmo Marconi held a telephone receiver to his ear and heard 3 faint clicks. The letter S in Morse code, sent across roughly 3,400 kilometers of ocean from Cornwall. The first transatlantic wireless signal ever received. A coast that had lived 400 years by hauling fish out of the water had just pulled a message out of the empty air. The island that ended at Cape Spear turned out to be, from another angle, the place where the new century began. Down in the harbor below, the working boats still lie against the wharves. Crab boats and coastal freighters and the odd sailboat under the same hill where the light first lands. The salt fish that built a Dominion is nearly gone from the trade now, kept alive on the flakes of a few older hands and served in restaurants as a taste of what the place used to eat. What replaced it is stranger and plainer at once. An oil camp 2 provinces away, a crab market across the Pacific, a signal pulled from the sky. Back at Cape Spear, the light that reached the continent first each morning still turns through the fog, over a coast that gave up being a country and learned, slowly, to be something else. The lamp holds to the hours it has always kept, and the water below it answers to no one.
Old Newfoundland half-dollars still turn up in curio trays along the coast, their worn faces carrying the memory of a Dominion that chose, by the narrowest kind of public consent, to become something smaller on a map and safer in a household ledger. But the coast did not end with the country. The salt cod still dries on a few flakes above the shore. Near Gander, a work bag waits by the door for the Sunday flight west. In Fortune, a ferry loads a catch bound across the Pacific. And out past Signal Hill, a crab boat clears the narrows in the early light, low in the water, running toward the open Atlantic, the way the boats have always run, carrying a coast that learned to make its living from the northern sea that started all of it.